My name's Jake, I'm 34, and I've been married to Emily, 31, for 6 years. Or rather, I was married. Things took a turn recently, and I'm still trying to figure out how it all went so wrong so fast. For a while, I thought Emily and I had a great marriage. We met through mutual friends, clicked immediately, and it wasn't long before we moved in together and tied the knot. She was charming, smart, and had this energy that lit up every room she walked into. I fell hard and fast. But in the past few months, something changed. Emily started pulling away. She became more distant, less affectionate, and would snap at me over the smallest things. I told myself she was just stressed with work. She'd been talking about some big promotion that would come with long hours and more responsibility. I believed her because I wanted to. The first red flag I couldn't ignore happened about a month ago. She started keeping her phone on silent, which she never used to do, and she'd take it with her everywhere. I'm talking everywhere, the bathroom, the laundry room, even to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. When I jokingly asked what was so important, she'd roll her eyes and say, "What? Do you think I'm hiding something?" I'd laugh it off, but it planted a seed of doubt. Things escalated when she suddenly had to work late more often than usual. She'd text me at the last minute saying, "Don't wait up. Something came up at work." She was a graphic designer working mostly freelance gigs, and her clients weren't exactly demanding. Still, I didn't question it. After all, I trusted her. Or at least I wanted to trust her. I didn't know it then, but those late nights and guarded phone habits were just the tip of the iceberg. What I'd walk into later would change everything. Last Friday started off like any other day. I kissed Emily goodbye as she sat on the couch, still in her pajamas, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She told me she had client revisions to work on that day. I headed off to my shift at the auto shop, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few miles away. Around lunchtime, I realized I'd forgotten my phone charger at home. Normally, I just let my battery die and deal with it, but I was expecting a call from my boss about some overtime work. So, I decided to swing by the apartment during my break to grab it. When I walked into our building, nothing felt off at first. But as I climbed the stairs to our unit, I noticed something strange. The door wasn't locked. Emily always locks the door, even if she's just running to check the mail. My stomach did this weird little flip, but I shook it off. I opened the door, calling out, "Emily? You left the door unlocked." No response. I walked through the living room, everything looking perfectly normal. Then I heard it. A low murmur of voices coming from the bedroom. At first, I thought maybe she had a friend over. But as I got closer, the laughter turned into something unmistakably intimate. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I pushed open the bedroom door, and there they were. Emily, sitting on the edge of our bed, her hand on the chest of some shirtless guy I didn't recognize. He looked younger than me, mid-20s maybe. They both froze, their faces cycling through shock, fear, and guilt in what felt like an eternity. "Jake, it's not what it looks like," Emily blurted out, her voice high and panicked. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my brain trying to process the scene in front of me. The guy grabbed his shirt off the floor, muttering something about just leaving. That's when everything inside me snapped. "Not what I think. Are you serious right now?" I couldn't even form words. My fists clenched at my sides. Ryan, the genius that he is, decided to chime in. "Hey man, let's just chill, okay? I didn't know she was married." "You didn't know?" I hissed, finally finding my voice. My blood was boiling, a ringing sound building in my ears. "You didn't know she's married, but you're standing here half naked in my bedroom?" Emily stepped between us, her voice shrill now. "Jake, stop it. You're overreacting. It was just what, Emily?" I shouted, cutting her off. "Just a little mistake? Just work stress? What the hell is wrong with you?" Ryan made the grave mistake of putting a hand on my shoulder. "Hey man, let's not make this a bigger deal than it has to be." That was it. Red mist. I swung before I even realized what I was doing. My fist connected with his jaw, and he went down hard, crashing into the nightstand. Emily screamed, but I couldn't stop myself. "Jake, stop it. You're going to kill him, she shrieked, clawing at my arms as I hauled Ryan up and slammed him into the wall. The framed photo of our wedding fell to the floor, glass shattering everywhere. Ryan was bleeding now, his lips split and his nose crooked. He raised his hands, begging.
Dude, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Just stop. But I couldn't. All I saw was this guy, this random punk, ruining everything I thought my life was. I threw another punch, then another, until Emily grabbed my face, forcing me to look at her. Jake, please, she sobbed. You're going to go to jail. Stop it, please. Her words cut through the haze, and I finally let Ryan slump to the floor. He was groaning, clutching his face, and muttering curses. My knuckles were raw and bloody, my chest heaving with every breath. Emily sank to her knees beside him, helping him up while glaring at me like I was the villain. What is wrong with you? She spat, tears streaming down her face. What's wrong with me? I shot back. You brought this into our home, Emily. Into our bed. She didn't respond. Instead, she helped Ryan to his feet and led him out of the apartment. He shot me one last glare as she opened the door for him, but I didn't care. My whole world had already collapsed. The second the door clicked shut, Emily turned to me, her expression shifting from fear to fury. You're a monster, she said coldly. Do you know what you just did? You could have killed him, and you could have destroyed our marriage. I shot back, my voice hoarse. You have no idea what it's been like for me, she yelled, her tears replaced with rage. You're never here, Jake. You don't listen. You don't care. You don't even see me anymore.
I stirrede her, utterly dumbfounded.
So your solution was to screw some random guy in our bed? You couldn't just talk to me? She crossed her arms, her face hardening. Maybe I wouldn't have had to look somewhere else if you'd been a better husband. That was the moment I knew there was no coming back from this. After Emily slammed the door behind Ryan, the apartment was dead silent. The adrenaline started to wear off, and the reality of what had just happened crashed over me. My hands were trembling, still slick with Ryan's blood, and the broken glass from our wedding photo crunched under my boots as I stumbled to the couch. Emily didn't say anything at first. She just paced the living room, her arms crossed, muttering under her breath. Then she turned to me, her eyes blazing. You need help, Jake, she spat. Serious help. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the stillness. I need help? You're the one who brought a stranger into our home and... I couldn't even finish the sentence. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed razor blades. Emily rolled her eyes, like this was some petty argument about forgetting to take out the trash. God, you're so dramatic. It wasn't a stranger. That stopped me cold. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. Ryan's? Someone I've been seeing, she said, her tone almost defiant. You don't get to judge me when you've been ignoring me for months. My jaw dropped. Seeing? Are you actually hearing yourself? You've been having an affair, Emily. How long has this been going on? She threw up her hands, like she was the one who had been wronged. Does it matter? What do you want me to say, Jake? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. Happy now. Sorry. That was it. That was all she had to say for herself. I stood up, looming over her, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't even know the woman standing in front of me. You're sorry? Do you even care about what you've done? About what this means for us? Her expression hardened again. Oh, don't act like you're perfect, Jake. You think working late and coming home dead tired every night is enough to keep a marriage alive? Newsflash. It's not. I needed more. I deserve more.
I stirrede her, stunned.
So your idea of more was to secretly meet some guy and sleep with him in our bed while I bust my ass at work? That's your solution. She shrugged. And I swear to God, it was the most infuriating thing I've ever seen. What do you want me to say, Jake? It happened. You can't change it. Maybe if you'd been more present, we wouldn't be here right now. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my jacket and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I didn't know where I was going, But I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment a second longer. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing. Anger, betrayal, confusion, all mixing into a toxic cocktail that made it hard to think straight. How could she do this? How could she stand there, so cold and smug, like I was the problem? Eventually, I parked at a random lot near the river. I sat there, staring at the water, trying to make sense of it all. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, lighting up with a text from Emily. "You need to come back and clean up this mess. Your tantrum broke the picture frame and Ryan's nose. Don't make this worse than it already is." I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. She was more worried about the damn frame than the fact that she had destroyed our marriage. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Instead, I drove to my buddy Chris's place. He'd been my best friend since high school, the kind of guy who'd always have your back. No questions asked. When I showed up at his door, he took one look at me and said, "What the hell happened?" I told him everything. Emily's distant behavior, the late nights, finding her with Ryan, the fight. By the time I was done, I felt raw, like I just ripped off a bandage covering a wound I didn't know I had. Chris was quiet for a moment, then said, "Look, man, you know I love you, but you've got to be careful. Beating the crap out of that guy, no matter how much he deserved it, could land you in serious trouble." I shrugged, feeling numb. What am I supposed to do, Chris? Pretend it didn't happen? Go back there and act like everything's fine? He shook his head. "No, but you need to think this through. You can't let her drag you down any further. Get a lawyer, figure out your options. Don't let her twist this around and make you the bad guy." His words made sense, but they didn't feel real. All I could see was Emily, sitting on that bed, lying through her teeth. The next day, I spent the night at Chris's place, trying and failing to sleep. By morning, I decided I needed to go back to the apartment. Not for Emily, but to grab my things. When I walked in, the place was eerily quiet. The broken glass from the picture frame was gone, the bedroom door shut tight. I thought maybe Emily wasn't home, but as I started packing a bag, I heard her voice. She was in the bathroom on the phone. "Yeah, he's losing it," she said, her tone sharp. "I don't know what he's going to do next. He went crazy, Ryan. I think I might need to get a restraining order or something." My blood ran cold. She was spinning this into me being the aggressor, the dangerous one. I couldn't stop myself. I pushed the door open. She froze, phone in hand, her face pale. "Jake," she stammered. "I didn't know you were here."
Ich lernte her.
"A restraining order, Emily? Really? You're the one who cheated. You're the one who brought him here. But I'm the problem." She tried to recover, flipping the switch to defensive mode. "You beat the crap out of him, Jake. What did you expect me to say? That you're some saint? You're unhinged." I didn't reply. I just walked out, her voice following me down the hallway. "You can't run away from this, Jake. You're going to pay for what you did." And she was right. A few days passed in a haze. I stayed at Chris's, not ready to face the apartment or Emily again. I didn't sleep much, replaying everything in my head. Walking in on them, the fight, her lies, her ridiculous phone call about a restraining order. I was trying to figure out my next steps when it happened. There was a loud knock at Chris's door early in the morning. I was still in sweats, sipping coffee, when he opened it. 2 cops stood there, one hand resting casually on his belt. "Jake Henderson?" the taller one asked, his voice firm. I stood, my heart sinking. "Yeah, that's me. You're under arrest for assault and battery," he said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Chris looked at me, stunned. "What the hell, Jake?" I didn't resist. I knew this was coming. Emily's smug voice on the phone echoed in my head. "You're going to pay for what you did." As they cuffed me, I asked, "This about Ryan?" The shorter cop nodded. "He filed a complaint. Says you assaulted him without provocation. Broke his nose, knocked out a tooth." "Without provocation?" I repeated, incredulous. "He was in bed with my wife." The cop shrugged. "Save it for the judge." They took me to the station, booked me, and threw me in a holding cell. It wasn't my first time in trouble. I'd had a couple of dumb fights in my early 20s, but it was the first time it felt like my life was really falling apart. The call. After hours of sitting in that tiny, fluorescent-lit cell, I got my one phone call. I dialed Chris, and thankfully he picked up. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice a mix of worry and frustration. "Ryan pressed charges," I said flatly. "I need bail money." Chris sighed heavily.
Jesus, man.
"Fine, I'll figure it out."
Sit tight.
While I waited, I kept imagining Emily and Ryan, laughing at my expense. It made my stomach churn. But there was something else, too, this nagging feeling that Emily had planned this. She had to know I'd snap if I caught her. Had she set me up? Was this all part of some twisted revenge for me, not being present enough? When Chris finally bailed me out, I was exhausted and furious. As we drove back to his place, he said, "You need a lawyer. Like, yesterday." "I know," I muttered. "This whole thing is a mess." "You think she's behind it?" he asked. I didn't answer, but deep down I knew the truth. Emily wasn't just destroying our marriage. She was trying to destroy me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of lawyer meetings, court dates, and mounting stress. I hired a decent attorney, Mark, who listened to my side of the story without judgment. When I told him about catching Emily with Ryan in our bed, he nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, none of that changes the assault charge," Mark said. "Adultery doesn't justify physical violence in the eyes of the law. You're looking at a tough fight, Jake." Ryan's statement to the police painted him as the innocent victim. According to him, he had no idea Emily was married, and I attacked him out of nowhere like some unhinged psycho. The part where I found him half-naked in my bed? Conveniently left out. Emily backed him up, saying I'd been acting unstable for months. "Do you think she set me up?" I asked Mark during one of our meetings. He hesitated. "It's possible she knew how you'd react, but proving intent in court is almost impossible. The focus will be on the assault, not the affair." Hearing that felt like another punch to the gut. Emily had taken everything. My trust, my dignity. And now she was trying to take my freedom. The twist. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Mark called me with some news. "We've got a new wrinkle," he said. "Emily's filed for divorce." I shouldn't have been surprised, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. "Of course she has," I muttered. "That's not all," Mark continued. "She's also requesting a restraining order. Claims she's afraid for her safety." That one nearly made me laugh. "She's afraid of me? After what she did?" Mark sighed. "Look, I know this feels like a setup, but the court's going to take her side unless we can prove otherwise. My advice? Stay away from her, don't contact her, and focus on the assault case. If you lose your temper again, it's game over." I agreed, but it wasn't easy. Every fiber of my being wanted to confront Emily, to demand answers, to make her admit what she'd done. But I knew Mark was right. Then, about a week later, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Ryan. "Jake, listen, man. I don't want this to get uglier than it already is," he said, his tone smug. "But you need to back off. Emily's done with you, and honestly, so am I." My jaw clenched so hard I thought I'd crack a tooth. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, do you?" I said through gritted teeth. "Yeah, I do," he replied, sounding almost amused. "I've got Emily and you've got, well, nothing. So why don't you save us all some trouble and move on?" The call ended before I could respond. I stared at my phone, my chest heaving. Ryan wasn't just some idiot who got caught in the crossfire. He was reveling in this, rubbing it in my face. I swore to myself then and there that I wouldn't let them win. The day of the trial came faster than I expected. Sitting in that courtroom, surrounded by strangers who would decide my fate, felt surreal. Mark had prepped me for every scenario, but nothing could have prepared me for seeing Emily walk in arm with Ryan. She looked polished, like she'd stepped out of a magazine, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup subtle but flawless. It was a stark contrast to the woman I'd married, the one who used to lounge around in sweats eating cereal from the box. Seeing her with Ryan made my stomach churn, but I kept my face neutral. The prosecution wasted no time painting me as the villain. They described Ryan as a poor, unsuspecting man who'd been brutally attacked for no reason. Emily's testimony didn't help. She described me as volatile and emotionally distant, saying my unpredictable behavior had been escalating for months. He would come home angry all the time, she said, her voice trembling just enough to seem convincing. I was afraid to tell him about Ryan because I didn't know how he'd react. Afraid of me. The same woman who had laughed in my face when I confronted her about the affair was now pretending to be a helpless victim. Mark did his best to counter their narrative. He brought up the affair, the late nights, and the fact that Ryan had been trespassing in my home. But the judge wasn't interested in the details of my broken marriage. To them, this was a clear-cut case of assault, and my emotions didn't justify my actions. The verdict. It didn't take long for the jury to decide. I was found guilty of assault and sentenced to 6 months in county jail. It wasn't the worst outcome. I could have been looking at years, but it still felt like a death sentence. When the verdict was read, Emily and Ryan didn't even look at me. They sat there, whispering to each other like this was all some minor inconvenience. As I was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I couldn't help but glance back at her one last time. She didn't even flinch. Prison life. Prison wasn't as bad as I'd imagined, but it wasn't easy either. I kept my head down, did my time, and avoided unnecessary trouble. The worst part wasn't the guards or the other inmates. It was the endless hours of thinking. I thought about Emily and Ryan, about the life I'd worked so hard to build, now in ruins. I thought about what I could have done differently, whether there was some moment where I could have turned things around. And I thought about what I'd do when I got out. Because one thing was clear, I wasn't done fighting. When I walked out of county jail after 6 months, the world felt different. The sky looked brighter, the air tasted fresher, but I couldn't shake the weight in my chest. I was free, but nothing about my life felt like freedom. Chris picked me up and gave me a bear hug that almost knocked the wind out of me. "You're out, man," he said, grinning. "Let's get you cleaned up." We went straight to his place, where he'd kept most of my belongings. I asked about Emily, and Chris's smile faded. "She's still with Ryan. They've been laying low since the trial. Word is, she's moving forward with the divorce." Stung, but I expected it. "Good," I said, trying to sound indifferent. "Let her have him." I spent the next few weeks trying to rebuild my life. Getting a job with an assault charge on my record wasn't easy, but Chris hooked me up with a friend who owned a construction company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The unexpected letter. About 2 months after my release, I got a letter in the mail. My heart stopped when I saw the return address. It was from Emily. I debated throwing it away without reading it, but couldn't resist the curiosity. Inside was a single page, her neat handwriting filling every line. "Jake, I don't know why I'm writing this, but I need to say a few things. What happened between us, what I did, was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. You were a good husband in a lot of ways, but I felt invisible. I know that's not an excuse for what I did, but it's the truth. Ryan made me feel seen, and I got caught up in something I couldn't stop. But the truth is, I regret it. Ryan isn't who I thought he was. He's been controlling, and I don't feel safe anymore. I miss the stability we had, even if it wasn't perfect. I'm not asking for us to fix things. I know it's too late for that. But I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I hope you find peace. Emily." I stared at the letter, my emotions all over the place. Regret? From her? After everything she'd done? Part of me wanted to throw the letter in the fire. Another part wanted to call her and scream at her for dragging me into her mess. But mostly I felt nothing. Closure. I showed the letter to Chris later that night. He read it, shook his head, and said, "What a mess. You think she's serious about Ryan?" I shrugged. "Doesn't matter. That's her problem now, not mine." And I meant it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt free. After Emily's letter, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her haunt me anymore. She'd taken enough of my time, my energy, and my peace. Whatever she was dealing with now was her burden to carry, not mine. I threw myself into work, putting in long hours at the construction site. The physical labor was brutal, but it kept my mind occupied. Every nail I hammered felt like a piece of my old life being sealed away for good. Chris convinced me to start going out again, even if I wasn't ready to date. "You don't have to jump back into anything serious," he said. "Just have a beer, shoot some pool, and remember there's a world outside of Emily and Ryan." Reluctantly, I agreed, and slowly, I started to rebuild a life for myself. A new chapter. One night, while hanging out at a local bar, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Rachel. She was smart, funny, and completely different from Emily. There was no pretense with her. What you saw was what you got. We started as friends, but over time, it grew into something more. Rachel wasn't looking for someone to save her or make her feel seen. She was confident and independent, and being with her felt easy. One night, I told her about everything: Emily, the affair, the fight, the jail time. I expected her to run for the hills, but instead, she just listened. When I finished, she said, "Sounds like you've been through hell, but you came out the other side, and that says a lot about you." Her words stuck with me. The last encounter. About a year after my release, I ran into Emily at the grocery store. She looked different. Her once perfect hair was unkempt, her eyes tired. Ryan wasn't with her. She hesitated when she saw me, then walked over. "Jake," she said softly. "Hi." "Hi," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. For a moment, we just stood there in awkward silence. Then she said, "I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're doing well." "Thanks," I said, glancing at the engagement ring on her finger. A ring that wasn't mine. And that was it. No dramatics, no apologies, no rehashing the past. Just two people who had once been everything to each other, now reduced to polite strangers. My advice: if you're reading this and you're going through something similar, here's what I learned. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Walk away. No matter how angry or betrayed you feel, violence isn't worth it. Trust me, it only makes things worse. Focus on yourself. Rebuilding after betrayal is hard, but it's worth it. Find what makes you happy, and don't let anyone take it from you again. Life doesn't always go how you planned, but sometimes the worst moments can lead to better ones. I'm living proof of that. Thank you for staying with me. This crazy journey is finally over, and I'm ready for what's next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more interesting stories. And leave a comment with what you would do in this situation. See you in the next videos.